everyone, this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of Exley Dyed Art by Science, and this is Fiber Talk episode number 11, and today we're going to be talking about Manx, the sheep. Manx sheep live on a tiny island off the coast of Britain called Isle of Man, and they're usually brown, have 4 horns, and have a pretty decent quantity of fleece. So the Fleece and Fiber Source book, which I refer to quite a lot, lists 3.5 to 5 pounds for a fleece, which roughly matches what I have for my 2 Manx fleeces. Despite the fact that it's brown, it does take dye. When the fleece grows out, the tips usually get sunburned, and so it will be lighter in color than the rest of it. So that's why there are these bits that are a bit lighter in color, and that's because if this hadn't been dyed, this would be sort of a yellowish tan color versus the rest of the lock, which would have been more of a warm brown. So that bit will take the dye more prominently than the rest of the lock, but it still takes dye much better than I would have expected a naturally colored wool to take dye. Castle Milk Morit did not take the dye very well. In fact, I really struggled because I don't like wasting dye. And when I was washing the fleece after I had kettle dyed it, it didn't want to take up the dye very strongly, and so I ended up having to wash some of the dye down the drain, which is a shame. But didn't have any problems with this. So clearly there are differences in the way that the color affects the ability to take up dye, but Manx I found takes dye really well. In terms of processing, despite the fact that Manx was one of those sheep breeds that went into the creation of Castle Milk Morit, my experience with the fleeces was quite dramatic. So in the previous video when I was talking about Castle Milk Morit, I basically said, I don't really like this. After spending, I don't know, about 14 ounces, I think I said, and about 750 yards of 2-ply worsted, I couldn't convince myself to keep going with it. So I think there's something to be said about picking your fleeces in general, so that's kind of a no-brainer. But also, there's only about a micron or so difference in those 2 fleeces, but I think there's a lot to be said with the actual lock structure, and maybe something to do with the way the animal is brought up. So I know that the Castle milk that I bought was raised on a farm that had a more combination feeding, whereas this one could possibly be predominantly grass-fed. And here's why I think this is the case. The Castle Milk Morit had a lot of hay and chaff in its fleece, whereas the 2 Manx fleeces that I have almost nothing in them. I don't think they were coated because it's not generally the trend for British people to cover their fleeces, especially for animals that are more rare breeds, because there's a lot of time and money investment, and you might not actually get someone to buy your wool. So I'm fairly certain that this was a grass-fed sheep, and so despite the fact that they should be very similar, I think this one is a lot softer because it is grass-fed rather than combination fed with hay. And it really just comes out in my experience. So in terms of carding it, I just decided to go with 1 drum carder so that I could keep these lovely tweedy bits. I love tweed yarns. They're very pretty and interesting to look at, and it does it naturally. So I just carded it once, which was very easy to do. It's a short enough staple to fit on a drum carder. In terms of spinning it, I spun obviously a bat versus roll lags, which I did for the previous Castle Montmoret, and it practically spun itself. So I did one bobbin, plied it on itself, and I think this was 100 grams. I'm gonna say it was 100 grams, and it's about a fingering sport weight. Some of it is a little bit thinner than others, but it's probably more of a sport weight yarn. The spinning process was amazing. It has a little bit of the lanolin still left on there, which the other one, I didn't wash it that much. I washed it once and rinsed it twice. And even after that, it still didn't feel like it retained a lot of the lanolin. Whereas the Manx seems to have retained a bit more of the lanolin, which is useful for spinning. But it also makes it, it feels healthy. It's like when your hair gets really dry and you're like, oh, I don't want to touch it. It's kind of like that. So the Castle Montmoret, it didn't feel nice in the hand, and it didn't feel nice when I was touching the skein afterwards. It just felt very coarse and rough. Whereas this, it was so smooth to spin. It was very nice to ply, and I literally cannot stop touching it. It's absolutely wonderful. In terms of application, now in the Fleece and Fiber source book, they found this to be 27 microns. My hands are telling me something different, and it just could be the fact that I bought this from a particular breeder who was less emphasizing their meat qualities, possibly, and maybe more emphasizing their spinning qualities, because I bought this from someone who typically sells fleeces to hand spinners. So that's possible, even though they might have also used the animals for meat. But because Manx and Castle Milks aren't bred specifically for their fleece qualities, you might actually get a lot of variation. And so maybe I just got really lucky and got two superb Manx fleeces, because they did come from the same farm. But there could be a lot more variability, and so if you are looking to buy a Manx fleece, maybe get a sample or talk to someone who knows what the fleeces are like, just to get like a third party opinion, where it's not like the person who's trying to sell you the item is saying, yeah, no, it's great. So you want an impartial party to kind of help guide your dollars. But if you see this, definitely give it a feel, and the 27 microns that they've listed in their book may be true, but it feels so soft that I would maybe consider this kind of like a coarser merino, maybe like 23 microns. But nevertheless, you could treat this as if it were a soft wool or a fine wool. So you could use this for next to skin items, mittens maybe. I mean, it feels like it's going to be quite durable. It poofed up quite a lot in comparison to the Castle Milk, which poofed up, but it didn't do quite as much. This poofed up kind of like the way that Cormo or Rambouillet or Polwarth might. So bear that in mind when you're spinning it. I think I was originally trying to get something more like a fingering weight, and then it turned out to be a little fatter because of all the poofiness. So keep that in mind. You know, obviously do tests whenever you're trying to create a specific gauge, or just let it be what it wants to be. I think that it would probably be best anything within the categories of normal yarn, so bulky being the max. You probably could do some fun art yarn things with this, although I haven't done that yet, and really play up with the burnt tips, dyeing this different colors and then carding it all together as a batch. Because if you I'll show you this one. So this, for example, that is a tip from a single lock. And so if you dye these different colors, then you would actually get a whole variety of colors for these tweedy bits. And then, you know, you could get more interesting yarns as a result. So would I recommend buying Manx? Absolutely. I really think that it's a conservation breed that we really, really need to pay attention to. And I think that because it's not necessarily easy to find, you might have better luck finding specific breeders who have rare breeds and contacting them directly to see if you can get samples or if you can get it washed on site before shipped, especially if you're in the United States. I don't know what the Manx situation is in America, maybe somebody will tell me. But I'm more willing to bet that because it's a British breed and it's a conservation breed, you're more likely to find it in Britain than you are in America. So getting a hold of either the fiber or spun fibers will be of a challenge, but I think it's really, really worth it because it's like a brown merino, but it has probably in some ways better qualities because I think it's more durable than merino would be at this micron count. It's so soft. I reference this book quite a lot, and I think part of the reason why I do is because there's lots of breeds in here, and even though they might have just one page or a couple pages to each breed, it's a launching off point. So if you don't have this book and you're really interested and you want to read up and learn a little bit more about all the different breeds, there will be a link posted below, so you can just click on that and get yourself a copy. But I can't stress it enough, being able to actually try it out for yourself helps you understand more both about what you've learned from it in the Fleece and Fiber source book, but also the point that they've made in the book, the two authors, where it's not an end-all. This is what you might expect, or this is what we have understood from our experience. But it's difficult to convey experiences across the board, especially with just textual options, or there are some pictures in here too. But it's very difficult because the way that we understand wools and spinning and enjoying it comes from being able to touch it and smell it, which smells actually kind of nice. It smells like wool. And the way that you understand is from the doing. So when you've gone through all these processes, you understand much more about what the wool is capable of because you've gone through the process physically, and it helps you understand a little bit more about the differences that you might expect compared to someone else's experience with the same breed. Their experience seems to be very similar with Manx as it was for mine, but their experience with Castle Milkmore was very different than mine, I think. And so I think it helps to explore personally to not only understand another person's experience, but so that you understand how to use these breeds in the future. And by having done this, you are supporting those small farms, you are keeping these sheep breeds alive. So you have a direct impact on whether these animals stay with us or don't. So yeah, something to think about. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will be back for another video real soon.